Okay, Dracula Chapter 12. Again, let's quickly recap what has happened in this chapter, because of course we've read it and we are now just merely going back through it. So we have Quincy Morris giving Lucy blood. Her teeth appear to be sharper. Arthur's become Lord Godalming because his father has died. And Lucy, her mother, and Mr. Hawkins all die. So we've got in this chapter 3 deaths. And the reason we have to have these 3 deaths is because all 3 lead to inheritance, which seems incidental at the time, but because the main focus is the build up to the moment of Lucy's death, but it does become clear later on why we have to have these 3 sets. So chapter 12 starts with Seward's diary, and it's the 18th of September. It talks about how, let's just remind ourselves that at the end of last chapter, of course, Van Helsing sends Seward a telegram which tells him to get to the house immediately, but of course Seward doesn't get that telegram. And when he does arrive on the 18th of September, he cannot get into the house. He rings quietly initially because he doesn't want to disturb the household, but there's no answer, and there's no answer, and he starts knocking, and nobody's answering. And it's interesting because his first comment is, "I cursed the laziness of the servants." So his first impression is very stereotypical of middle class thinking, and I want you to keep hold of this in this chapter. Very representative middle class thinking that the servants are lazy, that's why they're not answering the door. Of course, this again is dramatic irony because we're well aware that the servants have been drugged. He starts to panic, and it gets even worse, and his next statement is, was this desolation, but another link in the chain of doom which seemed drawing tight around us? So again, his rhetorical question guiding the reader. We now need to think about it as a chain of doom, so we're being surreptitiously guided and given prompts to get us to think specific things. He says, was it indeed a house of death to which I had come too late? So again, notice the use of the metaphors there, the idea of the chain, another link in the chain of doom, giving the implication that chains are strong and used to bind, and the fact that it's referred to as a house of death. Remember, another phrase for a house of death is a charnel house. Okay, so he cannot get in the house. He says, I could find no means of ingress. We are reminded that although Seward is a competent doctor, he is not as resourceful as his mentor. Okay, and we know that of course he needs the skill of his resourceful mentor to be able to gain access. But of course, as soon as his Van Helsing shows up, his first question is, did you not get my telegram? And again, we are reminded of how chapter 11 ended, the significance of the telegram, and again this use of interrogatives builds tension, and the author is deliberately forcing us to follow a particular line of inquiry. So when Seward says we can't get in, well, Van Helsing says, well, we must make a way to get in, we must make one, and he takes out a small surgical, sorry, that should be saw, I do apologize. So he is very resourceful because he looks in his bag and he finds the tools of his trade, and he is able to use them in another environment or use them for a different purpose, and in this case it is to gain access. So in they get, and they find the servants all over lying about, and Seward says there was no need to think them dead. And why? Because there was the smell of laudanum. So they finally realize that these servants have been drugged, something we've already known. So they go up to Lucy's room, and with white faces and trembling hands, we opened the door gently and entered the room. They're fearful of what they are going to find. It's also a reminder to us that we need to be fearful because, again, if you remember at the end of chapter 11, we don't actually know quite what the situation is left like. Okay, so we now also gaining insight here. Again, the use of the questions. How shall I describe what we saw? On the bed lay two women, Lucy and her mother. The latter lay farthest in. She was covered with a white sheet, but the edge had been blown back by the draught, showing the drawn white face with a look of terror fixed upon it. So Lucy's mum is clearly dead, and what we are supposed to realize is that she's died of fright, hence why a look of terror is fixed upon her face. Lucy, on the other hand, her throat was bare, showing the two little wounds. Okay, so what was around her neck has been ripped off, because if you recall, Lucy's mum ripped off the garlic and put it around herself. But as a result, the two little wounds are showing. Note the use of the definite article the. So we know that these are the specific wounds, and it is a reminder to the reader that Dracula is the one who to have caused these wounds, which have now become mangled. So notice how throughout the text so far it's been degrees of I was going to say awfulness. It's very poorly put. But initially we had just two white holes. Then they had rough edges, and the edges became raw, and then the holes became bigger, and now they're completely mangled. So the more Dracula attacks and the more aggressive he becomes, the worse the state of the holes in Lucy's neck become. So Van Helsing leaps to his feet and he cries, "It's not yet, too late, quick, quick, bring the brandy." So not only is he giving Seward a sense of hope, but he's giving us, the reader, a sense of hope. Maybe things are not as dire as we first thought. And off runs Seward, and he sorts everything out. So the servants are roused. So he says he was stern with them. Okay, and they went about their way. He talks about sacrifice, and they went about their way half clad. So what has happened is he rouses the servants. He sees to their sense of panic, because they're very worried, they don't know what happened. He says he would not let them talk. He said, and then he uses the word sacrifice to manipulate them, because he says if they delay, they're going to be sacrificing Lucy. She has already been sacrificed, but it's a very good emotional form of blackmail, that it will be your fault. It's the idea of using blame to get them to behave in a particular way. It's also, remember, a reminder of the impact of religion and the importance and significance of religion in this text. So Seward is clearly very capable. He deals with the servants. He brooks no nonsense. He urges them into action. But I find it very interesting that at no point are these servants given names or identity. They are just a generic servant and representation of servants in general. Because they're so incidental and they're just merely there to help prop up the plot, they're soon forgotten. And my question to you is, do you think, therefore, that Stoker is trying to show attitudes of Victorians, middle class, towards servants? They are incidental and soon forgotten. Or alternatively, is this just demonstrating a stereotype? I'll let you have a think about that. So it's all happening. Everyone's running around. There's a sense of chaos. We're reminded of the seriousness of the situation, because Van Helsing talks about how that he sees no light in over the horizon. But as he gets Lucy to breathe again, her lungs had a perceptible movement. He's terribly excited, and he shouts out, "The first gain is ours. Check to the king." Now, this immediately tells us, first it gives us a sense of hope, but it immediately shows us that this is a battle. It's a battle between good and evil, and Van Helsing feels that they have won this round. So Van Helsing is clearly aware of what is going on here. Also, phrase check to the king is a chess term, so therefore its idea it's the step before checkmate. So the implication being that this battle is strategic, it's one that is fought using rational thought, and it is very convoluted and structured. But similarly, by saying check to the king, it could also be the idea that the Christ is known as the King of Kings. Perhaps he's saying, chalking one up to the Christian faith. Okay. They get Lucy, they open the shutters because, of course, everything had been drawn and blinds closed, which is part of the etiquette of death that people observed. And of course, now that Lucy's coming around, Seward's going, what do we do now? Where do we turn for help? And again, we've got this use of rhetorical questions. It implies that there is no hope, that there is nowhere to go from here. And ironically, as if by coincidence, amidst all of this chaos, Quincy Morris manages to get into the house unannounced. Amazing good fortune. The doctors need very fresh blood, and luckily a representative of the New World is there to volunteer. Need has just been voiced. Poof, Quincy is there offering his blood. So critics have argued or criticized, certainly, Stoker and his use of coincidence. Perhaps he was just hoping the average reader wouldn't pick up on this, but he needs to move the plot forward and he needs this to happen. So we are also reminded, though, that as Quincy comes in, please remember, he was one of Lucy's suitors. He asked her to marry him and she declined. And I think we need to realize that it's only now that we see that the fact that Lucy had 3 suitors was very significant, not just to tell us about Lucy as a character, not just as a cabalist number, but the idea that it moves the plot forward, and we need, obviously Quincy needs a reason for being able to give blood. So why is he here? He says he received a telegram from Homewood, from Arthur, saying, have not heard from Seward for 3 days and am terribly anxious, cannot leave. Father's still in the same condition, send me word. How Lucy is, do not delay. So we see the bond of friendship here, and Quincy drops everything to go and sort it out. He explains Arthur's telegram sent him to find out what is going on. And as he arrives, Van Helsing strode forward and took his hand and looked him straight in the eyes. A brave man's blood is the best thing on this earth. And when a woman is in trouble, you're a man by no mistake. Okay, so again, Victorian stereotype. We have this man come to save the damsel in distress. Dun, 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 dun. He's really strong. He'll be strong enough to give blood. But it's also the idea that he is an adventurer, he's a big strapping man, and when Van Helsing looks at him, he says, well, clearly you are a man's man, you are an outdoorsy, strong bloke. So we give blood. We don't go into great detail anymore about this because we've already done that. And Quincy, despite being a man's man, does need time to lie down and have a glass of wine and recoup from the situation. Now, it's at this point where Seward has gone back upstairs and they look at Lucy's letter that she wrote the night before. And Seward's question is, in God's name, what does it all mean? Was she or is she mad? Or what sort of horrible danger is it? So again, just a reminder of the idea of madness being a predominantly female affliction, and the question always being, first, is she mad rather than is it supernatural? Okay. Van Helsing clearly is able to think on his feet, as is Seward, and they decide that they need to act properly and wisely. They don't want an inquest. They want to get everything sorted out so that there is, especially in terms of Mrs. Westenra, so that there's no major investigation. Everyone knows that Mrs. Westenra had heart disease, and therefore Von Helsing and Seward, both being doctors, they can sign the death certificate saying that. That way, and he says he is going to go to the registrar. Seward says he's going to the registrar and the undertaker himself in order to expedite the paperwork. They don't want people to know what happened again. It's all about reputation. It's about being it's about looking after one's reputation, and it's about being discreet is the word I was looking for. When Seward gets back, Quincy's waiting for him, and Seward rebuffs him by saying, I'll let you know as soon as I find out. And when he does come downstairs and they're alone, Quincy questions Seward, and he seems to be the voice of reason. He has been absented from all the chaos up till now, so he is able to look at the situation with fresh eyes. He says, you know I love that girl and wanted to marry her, but although that's past and gone, I cannot help feeling anxious about it all the same. What is it that's wrong with her? The Dutchman, and a fine old fellow he is, I can see that, said that time you two came into the room that you must have another transfusion of blood, and that both of you were exhausted. Now, I know well that you medical men speak in camera and that a man must not expect to know, but that this is not a common matter. So he gets straight to the heart of it. He is again a stereotypical American. He doesn't mince his words, unlike the British, who are discreet and they talk around things and they never mention anything. Quincy gets straight to the heart of the matter and says, why on earth does she need blood transfusions, and so many? In fact, we are also reminded that when he talks about it, he says, I've not seen anything pulled down so quick since I was on the pampas and had a mare that I was fond of go to grass all in a night. One of those big bats that they call vampires had got her in the night. Okay, pampas is grass, and it's like out in a giant field, not a field, it's like a huge plain, a huge area. Okay, and this horse that he put out gets attacked and eaten. Well, the blood gets sucked by a vampire bat. The word vampire is the first time used in this novel in connection with Dracula. The only other time that the word has appeared is when Jonathan uses it in connection with werewolf when he's looking up the word in the dictionary. Okay, but this is prior to us meeting Dracula. So he says, wants to know what's going on. How long has this been going on? So we get told about 10 days. And he says, my goodness, that's terrible. What is going on? What is taking the blood out? And he gets straight down to it. The million-dollar question. And as Seward says, that is the crux. And Van Helsing is simply frantic, and we are at our wits' end. I just would like to stop at this point and say to you, note the order in which the men have donated their blood to Lucy. It's been very, very specific. So the first one has been the pure blood of an English aristocrat, Arthur. Okay. So it's, again, bloodline. The second has been the blood of an English educated professional middle-class person, Seward. The third has been the old blood of a European philosopher and savant, Van Helsing. And fourth is the young blood of the Wild West. So I purport that Stoker is exploring the idea of old alliances against the new threat to Western civilization arising in the East. Okay. I think it also indicates a notion of the idea of who is worthy of mingling their blood with an Englishwoman's blood. Especially since Lucy is of noble and genteel birth. She can't just have any blood mixing with her. So they've got her, they've managed to keep her going, and as the day comes, the day dawns, its searching light showed the ravages in poor Lucy's strength. Okay, the idea that the light is searching is, remember, light is representative of purity, goodness, insight, knowledge. It's searching, so it means it's struggling, and in its search it shows us the ravages that Lucy is pretty much on her last legs. And this is the truth. Light also represents truth. Lucy is going to die. Nothing can be done to save her. And the constant reference to the word sleep, slept in the past tense, the present participle sleeping. Remember, sleep is said to mimic death, and poets like Shakespeare and John Donne and Ben Jonson talk about sleep being the precursor to death, or being the mild form of death. Okay, so this constant reference to sleep and sleeping is an indication to us that her life is drawing to a close. Also, again, a reminder that in sleep we cannot necessarily be held responsible for our actions. So the sun was setting, full and warm. Again, remember, this is a metaphor. It's the end of Lucy's life. The sun is setting on her life. When Arthur was simply choking with emotion, and none of us could sleep. An English gentleman has a stiff upper lip and remains composed and does not show his emotion or give in to it. So the fact that Arthur is choking with emotion could imply that he is trying very hard not to give voice to it. Alternatively, it could show that how emotional he is, depending on how you look at it. So we end this with 1 o'clock in the morning. We end Seward's diary with God help us all, which is not only a reminder that Dr. Seward is a man of wavering faith, but also the idea that this is a supernatural situation and mere mortals cannot solve the problems. So I reckon that this novel implies the idea of vampirism as a condition that you can transmit via blood, I suppose, a bit like herpes or or AIDS. Okay, so how and what does the modern reader perceive about this? Is this still the idea that the modern reader and modern moviegoers and things imply that it is something that is by bloodletting and by sharing of blood you become a vampire? And to what extent do you think, as a modern reader, our attitudes mirror or delineate from the Victorian attitude towards vampirism? Again, just something for you to think about. We then go to the 17th of September. So we're going backwards here because we've been on the 18th of September. So we're going backwards here. And we see a letter from Mina to Lucy, which has been unopened by Lucy and is never to be opened by Lucy, because clearly she is too ill to read these letters. And what we're doing here is that we're taking a break in the stress of it all, and we're going to find out about Mina and Jonathan. Okay, so Mina has been with Jonathan in Budapest and is unaware of what is going on with Lucy. Okay. So she tells of her news, how she and Jonathan have returned to England. They're in Exeter, and they're visiting Mr. Hawkins, and apparently he was said to have a attack of gout. Okay, and when they go and visit, if they find out that Mr. Hawkins they knew that Mr. Hawkins always saw Jonathan as a son, but they find out that he has willed everything he has to them, which of course is significant later. So we have the inheritance there. We then go forward to the 20th of September, and we have a report to Dr. Seward from Patrick Hennessy. So he reports to Dr. Seward on what Renfield is up to, his condition, and through this report we discover that Dracula's boxes are being moved from Carfax. Okay. Renfield, surprise, manages to escape, and before he can be captured in a very violent struggle, he hurts the workers moving the boxes. And the only way that they can be placated is by the doctor who's writing this report. He says he gives them money and something strong to drink. So as we go through this, we find out obviously that Renfield very conveniently has managed to escape again. This time he had broken out through the window of his room, and he attacks the workers moving Dracula's boxes because he seems to be worried that they are taking away his chance for immortality. And he says, "I will fight for my Lord and Master." Again, a fight between good and evil, between Christianity and the devil worship, I suppose. But the irony is that the Christian faith requires very unselfish behavior. So you are more worried about as a Christian, you're more worried about other people's immortality, and you spend your whole life devoting your time to trying to get them to believe in Christ and follow Christ and therefore have eternal life. Whereas Renfield's focus seems to be only on his own mortality or immortality. So his behavior is the opposite of traditional Christian behavior. I think it's important that you realize Renfield understands the significance of the boxes being moved. He knows they have to be moved out of Carfax. But Stoker needs us to find out about it because he needs to create a trail so that later in the novel, when the men need to track Dracula and track what's going on, his boxes leave a trace because we have names and addresses for all of those involved, so they can actually track these boxes of earth. Interestingly, I think Stoker also uses this to reinforce the stereotype that he established with the zookeeper interview, the idea that lower classes find work very thirsty, hard work is very thirsty, and seem to always be on the scrounge for some alcoholic drink or the means to pay for it. And I think you need to remember that throughout the text, Stoker uses the stereotype often when we encounter working class men. Again, I leave it to you to judge, but please remember, at the time, this would not have raised eyebrows. We then are on the 18th backwards, 18th of September, and we've got another unopened letter from Mina, which starts with, "Such a sad blow has befallen us. Mr. Hawkins has died very suddenly." So Mina's two unread letters, I think, further the plot. They explain to us how Jonathan and Mina gain financial independence. Okay. Clearly, this is important for two reasons. Firstly, it raises their social status in society, because remember, he was a solicitor and she was an assistant teacher, so they would not have been obviously as highly viewed as Arthur and Lucy. But this way it puts them in higher esteem and gives them social equality with the other characters. But it also gives them, I think, the freedom to finance their pursuit of Dracula, because they would need money to be able to travel and follow Dracula in order to kill him. Arthur clearly also gains his financial independence because his father dies, so he too can get himself involved. We're now back to Seward's diary, 20th September. I want you to think about how Stoker jumps between the dates, and I want you to think about how this impacts the structure of the novel. How would the reader's attitudes and ideas change if this chapter was put in date order rather than jumping from date to date? So it's done deliberately. What everyone finds out, or what we the reader finds out, Stoker is controlling. So I want you to go back and look at the chapter again and see what is the effect of if you take if you read the chapter in order, in date order, rather than in the order that it has been written. Okay. So Seward's diary explains to us that Seward is he relieves Van Helsing, who's watching over Lucy, and sees a very large bat, which of course is important. Lucy is different when she's sleeping and awake, and Seward comments on her odd attitude towards the garlic. She doesn't seem to be very happy with it, and he can't understand why. Van Helsing returns. Obviously, he notices her neck wound has vanished, and he predicts her death. So he prepares Lucy for a last visit from Arthur, who is come to keep vigil at her deathbed. So we are told that her canine teeth, as we said at the beginning when talking about the summary of the chapter, appear to be longer and sharper. So although Seward notices this, he explains it away as a trick of the light. Remember, seeing her teeth as getting sharper and longer apparently is out of context, so it means nothing to him. Whereas to us, the reader, we are well aware that it shows that she's transforming, and again, frustration. Also the idea of elongated teeth and sharper, and the idea that the canine teeth, subtle link to dogs. And remember, Dracula is associated with dogs, wild dogs, wolves, etc. So Lucy is lying there. Arthur has come to keep vigil, and Lucy suddenly calls for him to kiss her. Now, interestingly, we've got Van Helsing demonstrating quite amazing strength because he drags him back. So Lucy's, Arthur, 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 I love you, come here and kiss me. But of course, Van Helsing won't let this happen. Okay. So notice this constant omission of details used to create suspense and tension, or suspension, as I've just melded there, because we again know what's going on. We have this overarching knowledge, and the characters don't. So Van Helsing is very, very clear and won't let Arthur get too close to Lucy, and in fact dragged him back with a fury of strength, because he obviously realizes what is going to happen and anticipates the transformation that's going to take place when Lucy dies. So he realizes that Lucy wants to kiss Arthur in order to transform him into a vampire like her. So again, notice it's using kiss, so it's the idea of sex and sexuality associated with death. So is my question again is to you, is Stoker trying to portray lust and sexuality as so bad, so evil, that it can lead to a person's downfall and ultimately their death? Okay. He tells him, you must not kiss her, not for your life. So the idea that Van Helsing knows that Lucy will take his life. He also realizes that Lucy is Lucy. Okay. Lucy, of course, is so cross at this that we saw a spasm as of rage flit like a shadow over her face. The use of the simile here demonstrates that this frustrated desire, because she cannot get at Arthur. So again, my question is, what is Stoker implying about repressed sexual desire? But we also know that it is not Lucy anymore, and that she has been foiled from taking Arthur with her. So again, her breathing is very ragged. Note how often it's mentioned. Again, please, again, it's mentioned over and over, reminiscent of heavy breathing, which we associate with excitement and heightened sexual awareness. All right. So she is in a terrible state, and she asks Van Helsing to give me peace, she says. Now, again, is Lucy lucid enough to realize that she is damned to hell because she has given her soul to Dracula? Is she asking Van Helsing to release her from the curse of vampirism? In fact, this is suggested later that is what she is asking when she says, "Give me peace." And I mean, alternatively, let's go out on a limb. Is she perhaps pleading on Dracula's behalf? Has she realized what has happened, and is she swapping allegiance? Is she trying to be supportive of Van Helsing and Seward by saying, "Help, help, help! End it now for me, so that I don't have to become one of the undead"? I think Stoker has purposely made Lucy's final words ambiguous because he wants us to make up our own mind. He wants us to think, where is Lucy at this point? Is she aware of what her actions are going to be when she's physically dead, and she is attempting to stop it? Again, it's up to you to decide. But note that Van Helsing only allows Arthur to kiss her on the forehead. This way Lucy will not have access to his neck. So Lucy dies, and Arthur is absolutely overcome by grief and is led away, and Van Helsing and Seward are left with Lucy's body. And Seward says death had given back part of her beauty, for her brow and cheeks had recovered some of their flowing lines, even the lips had lost their deadly pallor. So again, it's the idea that she has been, since she has been the bride of Dracula, she has been dying, and now that she is dead, she is alive. I stood beside Van Helsing and said, "Oh well, poor girl, there is peace for her at last. It is the end." Okay. And he turned to me and said, "Not so. It is only the beginning." And when I asked him what he went, he said, "We can do nothing as yet. Wait and see." Okay. He still refuses to explain what's going on. Okay. He still refuses. And we are increasingly frustrated. I'm sure our frustration is mirrored by Seward's, who would also like to know what's going on. So we end this chapter with the realization that obviously Dracula has manipulated a number of the characters in the text. He wants to achieve something, and he gets them to do what he wants. So my question to you, though, is, if this is the case, to what extent at any point can we hold characters responsible for their own actions, or are they solely under Dracula's influence? So please, I want you to think about that. To what extent can the characters be held responsible for what they are doing?